Okay, we continue today. We finished up Genesis 28 last week. We're going into Genesis 29. This is a fascinating chapter because there's just so many things. You know, we've been in Genesis for 28 chapters, and it is so highly structured. It is so intentional. The author is putting things in place, and he's constantly making connections. And what we see now is a story as Jacob flees the land and he goes up northeast in search of a wife. The tables are kind of turned on Jacob. Jacob is called the deceiver, and we see that what goes around comes around a little bit in this scripture day. Just really interesting. He goes and he meets Rachel. So let me start with a big question for you to think about. As believers in Jesus, if we serve God's outcome will, that means what God wants to happen, if that's what our goal is, does it really matter how we go about bringing about God's will? Does how we go about it matter? Well, that's an easy question, isn't it? Don't we wish all of them were that hard? Yeah, yes, it matters a lot how we go about it. And so we're going to begin Genesis 29. Jacob was in exile. Right at the end there was a lot of stuff. As we went through Jacob's ladder, there was a lot of stuff about, okay, Jacob's going to be leaving the land. God said, I'm going to go with you wherever you go, and I'm going to bring you back. And what we see here is that maybe God's will happened. Jacob got the blessing, but maybe God is not so thrilled with how Jacob has gone about, how Jacob has carried himself in pursuing God's will. Or maybe Jacob was pursuing Jacob's will somewhat and God's will at the same time. Do we ever do that? Do we ever try to do what good for God but maybe get a little attention from it? I mean, we have to be careful about that all the time. So Jacob is traveling, and we pick up in verse 1. It says, so Jacob went on his journey, and he came to the land of the people of the east. So Jacob is got dual purposes, if you remember. He is fleeing from Esau in fear, so Esau won't kill him, because he went about things in a way that made Jacob angry. At the same time, he is going to look for a good believer girl and not marry a pagan woman of the land, somebody who is going to tempt him to worship other gods. Now, what do we know? Is there a clue? I'm not sure that there is a big clue, but is there a possible clue in the people of the east? Have we run into any situations before in Genesis where going east was significant? Well, there have been several cases, and we've talked about it. The sun comes up in the east, and so, let's see. Yes, the sun comes up in the east and goes down in the west. In the ancient cosmology, the way they thought about the way things are, the way the world works, is the sun is the face of God coming up and smiling on you. And so, for example, when they would put the tabernacle up, they would always turn the tabernacle so it was facing the east. So first thing in the morning, when the sun came up, God would be looking into the tabernacle. And so for that reason, when people head east, it seems, from the way it's treated in the Pentateuch, in Genesis, that they are sneaking or hiding from God. But when you travel in a westerly direction, you are traveling with God at your back, God watching you. And so we've seen numerous cases where, for example, when the children of Israel go into the Promised Land, the most direct route was for them to head from Egypt northeast into the land. But instead, they swung way around Moab and Edom, and they came in to the Holy Land traveling west. So they went way out of their way so they could travel west and be in God's sight. I don't know, it doesn't seem to be a major story here because he was going to his family, but I wonder if there's not a hint. Oh yes, and the other big example is Cain. Which direction does Cain travel after he slays his brother? He goes to the east. Which way do Adam and Eve go when they go out of Eden? They go to the east. So that is traveling away from God. And I would say, I have said a lot about Genesis. We've been going since June of 2019 in Genesis, so I've said a lot. Jacob, I find to be the most difficult character in Genesis to pen. I think there is an intentional degradation of the characters of the patriarchs. I think Abraham is supposed to be the most stable, the highest character man. We know he did wrong. He made bad choices. But in general, Abraham is the pinnacle. Isaac, not so much. I've been critical of Isaac. The text is not extremely flattering, but not really bad, but he does some things that are questionable. Jacob's life is a train wreck. Now, he says many things that very much, with his mouth, he very much proclaims Yahweh from time to time. But when you watch his actions, it appears to me that the author wants us to see that he does quite a bit of traveling east. He does quite a bit of serving Jacob's needs. Now, again, I'm going to ask maybe the same question that I asked earlier in a different way. Can God use us when we do things for ourselves and not for him? Or partially for him, but partially for ourselves. Can God use us anyway? Can he work his will when we do that? Yeah, God works his will no matter what we do. And I would give you the classic example would be Samson. Did Samson do anything? Is there a single thing that Samson did that was not selfish? In all the story, a long story about Samson in Judges, does he do one single act that is for God and not for Samson?
No, but God had told the Israelites to do away with the Philistines.
Yes.
But they was the tribe of Dan was getting too friendly with them.
Right.
So God raised up Samson so that they would get so mad at him that they would become enemies and
right.
Fight.
It just says it. It says it flat out, doesn't it? God raised up Samson to aggravate the Philistines. So the Philistines would be mean to the Israelites to the point where they would be willing to come together and fight the Philistines rather than fight one tribe at a time and get defeated. So, this is the point that I'm making. Did Samson do for himself or did he do for the Lord? Well, Samson was doing for himself. Did God use what Samson did to bring about his will? Certainly. Explicitly. I mean, it just says he did. And so I think that's a thing that is going on here. I think when it uses a phrase like, he went to the land of the people of the east. You remember in chapter 11 it says the people went to the plain of Shinar in the east and said, let us make a city for ourselves and to make our name great. And so I think this is a hint. Jacob is a mixed bag of a character, in my opinion. Now, Jacob's latter story in chapter 28 was pointing to his exile from the land. God is everywhere. God goes with him where he goes. And so the theme of this chapter is that Jacob is in exile. All right, remember, Yahweh has already said by this point, behold, I'm with you, and I will keep you wherever you go. Now that statement right there is important but might be lost on us. Doc, where is God? I'm asking you a theological question. Where is he? He's right here with us, so he's here with us, but he's not in England. He's there too. How can God be here and there? God is everywhere, right? And we're comfortable with that. You know, that is a philosophical thought about God, a theological thought about God that comes because the Bible has taught that to us. Before the Bible was written, people did not think that way about gods. All gods were local gods. The idea that there was a universal God, they didn't think that way. We think that way because we have the Bible, and the Bible has been here 3,800 years or so. The teaching, the theology of the Bible has been around for almost 4,000 years, so we think that way. They did not. They thought there would be a God of Burke County, maybe even just a God of Upper Drexel. And then you go over to Hildebrand, and there's another God, and then there's different kinds of gods. You know, there's gods everywhere. And so just that fact of God, this Yahweh, saying, I'll go with you wherever you go. Now, symbolically, the land of Israel, the Garden of Eden, the land of Israel, is the place where they dwell together with God. It is the promised land. It is the place of fellowship. But he makes a big statement. He says, I'll go wherever you go. I will be with you wherever you go. And what we know after 4,000 years of the Bible, after Jesus the Messiah coming, after we understand salvation through the cross, is that once I accept Jesus as my Savior, maybe a series of events happens and I begin to doubt. Does my doubt nullify my salvation? No. Not as I read the Bible. You are sealed by the Holy Spirit. So in other words, if you think you can lose your salvation, you're saying, what God did to me, I can undo. And so the implication is we save ourselves, I think. Anyway, I don't want to open up a big can of worms on that, but nevertheless, I can backslide. I know for a fact that I can backslide when I go out of the land of fellowship with God in my heart. And I've been there. Am I alone? It certainly feels alone, but God goes with us. God goes with us. And so this is a huge verse. And I will bring you back to this land of fellowship with me. If not here on this side of the heartbeat, I will bring you back after your heart stops beating. For I will not leave you until I have fulfilled all my promises to you. In other words, this is eternal. So that's in the background here as Jacob travels. Then we jump forward to the end of chapter 28, the last 3 verses. Then Jacob made a vow, if God will be with me and keep me in this way that I am going, to Padan Aram, fleeing from Esau. Esau won't catch me. I'll find a wife so that I can come back to my father's house in peace. Then Yahweh shall be my God. This stone that I rested my head on while I had the dream, I have set as a pillar. A pillar in the ancient world was a religious symbol. That was an altar for them. We find a lot of these around in the Holy Land and all that area. Set as a pillar, this shall be God's house. This is to mark a location of a significant religious experience with God. And of all that you give me, I will give you a tenth. So this, if you remember, Melchizedek was the first mention of a tithe to honor God. Here's the second mention of a tithe, where we get that number. A tenth of all that I have will be given to honor our relationship. Jacob's quest for a wife, as we go into chapter 29, is very similar to Genesis 24, where Abraham sent his servant up to find Rebekah. There is a difference, and it's a literary difference, and it's significant that we mark this. the servant narrated. And so he told us, surely God is working a plan here. That doesn't happen with Jacob. What we have gone now from having a narrator tell us what is happening and how to frame it, to we are just watching now. So it's almost like that was our teaching time, chapter 24, and now we're having an exam where we watch for ourselves and we make decisions. Jacob doesn't tell us anything in this chapter, what to think about. In Genesis 29, Jacob is silent. We are guided by his actions. And that's another reason that Jacob is difficult to unpack. When Jacob speaks, Jacob says good things. I'm going to serve God. But when Jacob acts, he doesn't always act very good. We go on to verse 2. And Jacob looked, and he saw a well after his travels in the field, and behold, there were 3 flocks of sheep lying by it, for out of the well, that well, they watered the flocks. A large stone was on the well's mouth. And I think what is going on here is that, of course, that well, it must have been in a pasture, and that stone was there to keep animals from falling in the well. It was also there to keep people that might come and take water from having an easy time doing it. I believe later on in the afternoon, when the cattle come to get water, there are enough shepherds there, shepherds and cattle drivers, to lift that stone. It's a massive stone. But when the women get there with the sheep, the flocks of sheep, there is nobody strong enough to lift that stone. It's what I've seen. We're having to kind of watch and decide what a custom is that happened a long time ago. So what we're to see in this little tight episode here is that God is directing. It's not said, Jacob doesn't say, surely God has brought me to this place, but we're supposed to see God directing Jacob. Verse 3, now all the flocks would be gathered there, and they would roll the stone from the well's mouth, water the sheep, and put the stone back in its place at the well's mouth. And Jacob said to them, my brothers, where are you from? To some of these shepherds. And they said, we are from Haran. And of course, that's where Jacob's grandfather, great-grandfather settled with his sons Abraham and so forth. So we're not told, but we're shown that Jacob, Yahweh had directed Jacob here. Verse 5, then Jacob said to them, to these shepherds, do you know Laban, the son of Nahor? Now, Laban means white, and so I don't really know that there's any significance to his name. And they said, yes, white, the color white, maybe like a linen, hanging out of white linen. But I'm not sure, in that etymology that's helpful at all. I don't see any significance to that. And they said, we know him. You're in the right place, in other words. So, verse 6, so he said to them, Jacob said to the shepherds, is he well? And they said, he is well. And look, his daughter Rachel is coming now with the sheep. Very much like with Eleazar. Verse 7, then Jacob said, look, it is still high day. It's not time for the cattle to be gathered together, water the sheep, and go feed them. But they said, we cannot until all the flocks are gathered together. We can't move the stone. We're not strong enough. And so it's possible, it's unclear here as I'm reading this, if these are the female sheep herders, or if these are men that he's talking to. It doesn't make it clear. If I'd have thought of that question earlier, I would have gone and looked at the tense. In Hebrew, you can look at the tense of the verbs, and it'll tell you if it's a guy or a girl talking. Verse 8, but they said, we cannot until after all the flocks are gathered together, and they have rolled the stone from the well's mouth, then we water the sheep too. We have to wait, but we can water the sheep after that. So the story is developing with the dilemma. And this is an important thing in oral tradition. When you tell a story, there's got to be some kind of dilemma that you have to overcome. And this is important. If everybody behaves the way they are supposed to when you're telling a story, when you have a dilemma, then the most powerful win, the wealthy do good, and the poor and the weak do not. And that's the way that we expect life to work out. Then God is inactive in it. So the story is, so the rock presents a big obstacle here. It's too big for the people that are present. As we look at it, we're just going to have to wait till all the men get here. But God is involved in bringing about an outcome. If something unexpected happens, then God is involved in it. The classic, going back to Judges, the classic story would be Sisera going into Jael's tent. He is a mighty warrior. The army of Israel fears Sisera. He's such a mighty warrior in battle, and little Jael is able to overcome him. That's an unexpected outcome, which would tell us that there is divine intervention guiding the story. So there's a big problem. We're not sure what's going to happen. To confirm God's participation, we might expect a bigger than life happening, something unexpected. We go on in verse 9. Now, while he was speaking with them, Rachel came up with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. And it came to pass, her name, the name Rachel, Rachel, is ewe, a female lamb. E-W-E means, and so I think that is connected, that's play on her profession there. And it came to pass, when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, that Jacob went near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. Do you remember, we met Laban before in chapter 24. Do you remember anything about Laban at that time? It was very obscure. There was just one little thing.
He was selfish.
Yes. When he saw Rebecca came in, I think with a gold nose ring or something, or a gold ring on her ear that was very expensive. And it said when Laban saw the expensive jewelry, he went running out to meet the servant. And so that's all really the only clue that we have. But the author's letting us know, Laban likes possessions. It also is really going out of the way to let us know that Jacob has come to the exact right place that he's supposed to be. He was looking for Rebekah's family in order to find a wife, and he came like an arrow shot to this exact location. Again, God is working. Now, narrative, as I've said, storytelling, before the Bible was written down, many parts of it existed as oral stories they told to teach lessons. And that is called narrative. Narrative is storytelling. Narrative is a different way of communicating information, as I've already said. When a character does something unexpected, we're often meant to see the hand of God in that event. So this stone usually took many men, and Jacob goes over and picks it up and moves it. God is working. God wants to single out Jacob in the eyes of the people around, maybe especially in Rachel's eyes. And so throughout Jacob's narrative, his story, he is shown to be strong and cunning, often, to do really smart things, in this case to be strong, And so there is good in Jacob. However, the text also shows him to have weaknesses and to do things that aren't maybe so good or savory. Why do you think that is? Why would we have a character in the Bible that does good and says good things and is strong sometimes, is he's very smart. He seems to be very smart about raising sheep, but then sometimes he makes bad choices and does weak things and gets passive. Why would that be in there?
It shows his humanity.
It shows his humanity. Is there anybody here that doesn't have good characteristics that they offer to God at times, and then at other times we all make weak choices, bad choices? We do things to serve ourselves or serve someone we love, uh, cut a corner. Maybe sometimes we're passive when we need to be bold and active. And so I really think Abraham is probably a little bit above most of us faith-wise. But by the time we get down to Jacob, I'm fairly normal. I mean, Jacob is a normal person. He is like all of us, weak when he relies on himself, weak when he is dealing himself a good hand from events, but strong when he relies on God and allows God to use him. In all of our weakness, God becomes strong. Jesus becomes strong. Here's another intended connection, I think, that's behind some of this. Now, who does tradition tell us is the human author of these stories? Who wrote them down for us? Moses. Well, when you jump to Exodus 2:16 through 17, we're talking about Moses here. Moses is in Sinai, or out in the desert. Now, the priest of Midian, Jethro, or they call him here Reuel, had 7 daughters who came as usual to draw water and fill the water troughs for their flocks. But some other shepherds came and chased them away. So again, the strong and the weak, power differential, that's often big in telling stories. So Moses jumped up and he rescued the girls from the shepherds. When he drew water for their flocks, then he drew water for their flocks. When the girls returned to Reuel, Jethro, their father, he asked, "Why are you back so soon?" And they say, "A man came and helped us." And so we didn't have to wait till the end to get our flocks watered. We were able to do it earlier. He said, "I want to meet this man." And so there is some level, and I think intentionally, maybe that Moses wants to connect himself with Jacob or finds a commonality with Jacob. Moses too was a mixed bag. Moses did a lot of good, but Moses also did a lot of he had episodes of weakness, and there's a lot of negative things that we're told about Moses. The very least of which are at least the Israelites didn't like him. Every human being in the story of Moses at some point turned on him, including his own brother and sister. And so, anyway, there is a connection intended that we won't see until we get to Exodus. In recognition of God's intervention, Jacob is moved with great emotion. Again, he doesn't say, "Surely God has sent me to this place." But we see this strong emotional reaction. And I think very much more, then Jacob, in verse 11, then Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted up his voice and wept. And so, people fix on that because that's a romantic scene. I think much more, it is normal to kiss a relative in this ancient Near Eastern culture. So I really don't think this is intended to be a romantic scene. I think he kisses her because he realizes, this is my relative. This is who God sent me to find, my relatives. and his emotion is much more directed towards God rather than towards Rachel. Though he does love Rachel really quick here, uh, it is, again, rather than him saying, God has led me to this place, we watch. We're watching. We're seeing it unfold. We're watching the TV here. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's relative and that he was Rebekah's son. So she ran and told her father. Then it came to pass when Laban heard about Jacob, his sisters. I abbreviated something there. What did I do? Then it came to pass when Laban heard the report about Jacob, his sister's son. Okay, I added a space in there. That he ran out to meet him. Again, he runs out to meet him. Now, before he ran out to find out who gave the gold jewelry, but that's a characteristic. Laban ran out there. And he embraced him and kissed him. Again, this is recognition of a family member. This is an ancient Near Eastern greeting, and brought him to his house. And so he told Laban all these things that had happened to him. And Laban said to him, surely you are my bone and my flesh. Most likely, a lot of commentators think that Laban is adopting Jacob as a son here when he says bone and flesh. And he stayed with him for a month. Now, here is another unexpected thing happens, and an irony. Irony is another device. It's one of the favorite devices of the Hebrew authors. They like for things to be turned upside down on people. And this is where we talked at the beginning about, does it matter how we do things? I believe God gives Jacob a little comeuppance here for being a sneaky character in general in his dealings in the past. Interesting section. Jacob has been a deceiver. He is the younger who took the birthright from the older. Now, it is God's will, but it seems that Jacob maybe was a little bit more devious or grabby than he needs to. The name Jacob probably is close to pinch or grab or snatch when he reached out and grabbed Esau's heel. And so grabby might be a parallel name today, nickname. Verse 15, then Laban said to Jacob, because you are my relative, should you therefore serve me for nothing? If you're going to stay here, shouldn't I pay you something? Tell me what your wages will be. Ancient Near Eastern negotiation, innocent enough on the surface. He appears to be offering him a job. But look how the verse jumps from, I'm going to need to pay you, to the next verse tells us, now Laban had $2. The name of the elder was Leah, which means something like tired or weary. That doesn't seem a really flattering name. And the name of the younger was Rachel, which I've already said was ewe, a female lamb. Leah's eyes were delicate. There are so many different translations of that word. Some of the translations actually say something very flattering, say Rachel's eyes were lovely, or Leah's eyes were lovely. And I think they're wrong. But Rachel was beautiful of form and appearance. What does it mean that her eyes were delicate? Weak is one of the most common translations. So the word there is rachot in Hebrew, and it means something like tender, soft, timid. It implies a weakness, some kind of weakness or tenderness or immaturity. Lots of speculation about what this is. Some people say that they say that stunning eye color contrasts with the skin tone. So whatever your skin tone is, if your eye color is a stark contrast, that's what we find special. Wow. And so one theory is that maybe she had very pale skin and a very pale eye color, and so it just did not stand out. I don't believe that it's saying she was ugly. More likely, let's see, have I got some more information here? Yeah, possibilities were that she was cross-eyed or that she had one lazy eye. Lots of different things have been speculated about Leah and her eyes. Looking at the way that the sentence is structured, there is Leah eyes were rachot, but, so there's a contrast with Rachel, but Rachel was beautiful in form and appearance. So most likely what we can take from the information we have indicates that Leah was not noteworthy. She was not special looking, not necessarily ugly, but Rebecca was wow, and Leah was not wow. There they are, the family, happy family. In verse 18, now Jacob loved Rachel. So whatever it was, he flipped her switch. He preferred Rachel. So he said, I will serve you, Laban, for 7 years for Rachel the younger. I want to take the younger. Laban said, it is better that I give her to you than I should give her to another man, a non-relative. Stay with me 7 years. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed only a few days to him because of the love he had for her. Time flowed by. Now that phrase, only a few days, we saw last chapter. Only a few days, or 2 chapters ago, Rebekah had said, now therefore, my son, obey my voice. Rise and flee to my brother Laban in Haran. Stay with him a short time, a few days, until your brother's fury turns away. So the human plan for Rebekah and Jacob was for him to go for a short time and get a wife and come back. And that is not going to happen. Both Rebekah and Jacob's plan go awry at this point in the story. After 7 years, the Hebrew word 7 also means oath. And so Sheba is the word. Beer-sheba is well of the oath, or well of the number 7, if you want to. So after an oath, a period of satisfying an oath, goes on in verse 21, then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go into her. Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast. And here's where we see the deceiver, Jacob, gets deceived. Now it came to pass in the evening that he took Leah, his daughter, and brought her to Jacob, weak-eyed Leah, and he went into her, and Laban gave also, this is a side note that's going to be important later, adding to the number of cars in this future train wreck, and Laban gave his maid Zilpah to his daughter Leah as a maid. Just in case you think it's okay to deceive, as long as God's will gets done, we have this. Verse 25, so it came to pass in the morning that, behold, it was weak-eyed Leah. And he said to Laban, what is this you have done to me? Was it not for Rachel that I served you? Why then have you deceived me? What goes around comes around. Jacob the younger, if you remember, displaced Esau the older. Now, to turn it on its head, Laban the deceiver, he had bargained for the younger, and Laban has given him the older, has tricked him to taking the older. Verse 26, and Laban said, it must not be done so in our country, in the custom of man, to give the younger before the firstborn. Fulfill her week, her 7 years. And we will give you this one also for the service which you will serve with me still another 7 years. So if you work 7 more years, I'll give you Rachel too. Divine comeuppance, I think. Verse 28, then Jacob did so and fulfilled her week. Worked 7 more years. So he gave him his daughter Rachel as a wife also. And Laban gave his maid Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as a maid. That will be important in the coming chapters. Jacob's history of deception has caught up with him. He ran from Esau's anger and is now caught in a deception of his own. And it is the opposite. The younger took the birthright of the older. Now he wanted the younger and he got the older instead. Then Jacob also went in to Rachel, and he loved Rachel more than Leah. And he served with Laban still another year, 7 years, to fulfill his oath. And it's going to be very interesting as this story unfolds. Very clearly, what is Jacob's will here with his wives? He wants Rachel. Rachel's the one he wants. Now, let me ask you a question to think about for next week. We don't have time. We need to end. Is this story promoting polygamy? Multiple wives?
No, the custom of the time to have more than one.
It's custom still some places, John. Not here.
If you could afford them, a man could have as many as he wanted.
Back in Bible times? Okay, well, we'll unpack that very clearly. What is Jacob's will? The author tells us Rachel. What was his first wife? It was Leah. Who gives him the most sons? Leah. What have we been watching since Genesis 3:15? The seed, the line of descendancy. Who do you think the line of descendancy goes through? Nope. Her fourth son, Leah's fourth son, is called Judah. So anyway, we'll pick all that stuff up later. Rebekah and Jacob's plan for a quick trip are over with. They have failed. How are we as believers to go about God's business matters greatly. Our method, how we go about serving God almost matters as much as serving God with it. And this is a story where Jacob has done God's will, or God's will has been accomplished in his life, but he's not necessarily been cooperating. God is with us, and we'll end up where he wants us. We will go where God's will puts us. But we must always, as we go, consider God. That's what it means to live, to walk with Jesus. Walking is our part. Jesus is with us no matter what choices we make. When we walk with him, we make choices that honor him. We must make sure that we are always seeking to follow God's will in every choice that we make. I mean, this story is just shouting, God's will is going to be done. Be on board and be honoring God as you make choices, trying to